is an imbalance between the people that do the work to keep this country going, who create the wealth of our civilization and don't get a fair share of that wealth because it's going to people who are vastly wealthy.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I got an awesome clip that compiled a bunch of other clips from the rail strike in the UK, but first I wanted to give y'all some background. Rail workers in the UK have not had a raise in 3 years, not since before the pandemic. They accepted pay freezes like so many other workers during the worst parts of the crisis, and in addition to that, now the employers are wanting to attack their pension system. They're wanting to dilute benefits. They're wanting to make staff work longer hours, make them poorer in retirement, while paying increased contributions to shareholders. They want to cut thousands of jobs across the rail network. They want to cut safety inspections on the infrastructure by 50%, in half. They want to attack terms and conditions and working practices in a form of internal fire and rehire, including lowering existing salaries and increasing the work week. They want to make massive cuts to catering services. They want to close every ticket office in Britain, regardless of the accessibility needs of the diversity of passengers. They want to cut real pay for most of their members through lengthy pay freezes and well below inflation pay proposals. Crazy, crazy stuff. Absolute Looney Tunes. And all of this while, let's see if this sounds familiar to working folks in the U.S., these rail companies make huge profits. From Open Democracy, the UK's largest train operator, First Group, boasted to investors that profits for this year were, quote, ahead of expectation, unquote, and pledged to resume dividend payouts. The company handed its shareholders £500 million in December 2021, just months after being awarded government contracts for running the South Western Railway and Trans-Pennine Express. Pounds are, I'm not sure the conversion rate, but it's something similar to a dollar. It's like either it is worth either a pound is worth $1.2 or a pound is worth like 2/3 of a dollar, something like that. But it's, it's a pretty, it's a comparable.
Typically, it's worth a little bit more than the dollar.
Okay.
But I don't know how Brexit has impacted that. It's been a few years since I was over there and did my little currency exchanges.
So, therefore, rail workers went on strike last week. They went on strike for 3 days, on Tuesday, on Thursday, and on Saturday last week. They'll be deciding on whether more strikes are necessary this week. And despite the obvious righteousness of their fight, the Labour Party, leadership issued a memo to their members to not participate in picket line actions.
Because why would a Labour Party do something on behalf of labor?
Crazy.
I guess they just compete with the Democrats to see who can be more frustrating and more disappointing.
That's wild. Absolutely wild. Fortunately, many members of Parliament, they have denied that, and they have actually openly supported the striking workers. But it is a bizarre thing for the leadership of the party to put out. And in addition to the outright hostility from the Conservative government, ambivalence from the Labour Party, they are being attacked in the press. And honestly, seeing some of the coverage of the strike has almost made me thankful for media here and the Democrats here.
Almost.
I'd hate to think that we had to deal with a left party, quote unquote, as antagonistic to us as the Labour Party, or a media as wholly antagonistic as the UK media. It is really, really just bizarre stuff that's coming out of here. But there's a silver lining, because that terrible media coverage has resulted in some awesome clips from the General Secretary of the Union, Mick Lynch, which is a really big reason I wanted to talk about the strike. Adam, let's go ahead and play those clips.
People who are doing full-time jobs, who are having to take state benefits and use food banks. That is a national disgrace.
What will they do if agency workers try to cross those picket lines?
Well, we will picket them. What do you think we'll do? We run a picket line and we'll ask them not to go to work. Direct lie.
If you are a Marxist, then you're into revolution and into bringing down capitalism. So are you or aren't you?
Richard, you do come up with the most remarkable twaddle sometimes.
The unions don't tell me who I am and whether or not I'm working class or whatever, any of those sorts of things.
I didn't tell you you weren't working class. I don't even know your name.
Onto the street.
You can see what picketing involves. I can't believe this line of questioning. Picketing is standing outside the workplace to try and encourage people who want to go to work not to go to work. What else do you think it involves? You've also lied that we left negotiations on Saturday and went to a rally. There were no negotiations scheduled for Saturday. You are a liar. The pensions of our members are going to be decimated. They're going to make us poorer not only while we're at work, but poorer in retirement. And that's an agenda that the government has got because they want to subsidise the private sector in this country, as they are doing in the health service, which is being consumed by the private sector, as they've done in the education service, which is being consumed by the private sector.
He should be apologising to the doctors and nurses who can't get to hospital, the patients who can't get their operation, the kids who will miss out on their education today, but also those armed forces veterans who risk their lives for our freedoms, who won't be able to celebrate Armed Forces Day on Saturday.
Do you want to apologise for all that, Mick?
Well, I think Jonathan should apologise for talking nonsense. None of that is true. And you're a liar. What the rest of the country suffers from is the lack of power, the lack of the ability to organise, and the lack of the wherewithal to take on these employers that are continually driving down wages and making the working class in this country poorer year on year on year, while the rich get richer. I welcome anyone that wants to join us on our picket lines and show us messages of support.
All right, well,
if Keir Starmer can't do that, that's a problem for him, not for us. I don't want people to be inconvenienced, and I want a settlement to this dispute. I can't do that with a backbench MP who's just learnt it off a script. And one of the reasons we're not affiliated is because Labour politicians since Blair have not identified with working class people. And failing to do that is one of the problems they've got in working class communities, and they've left the door open to populists and others to come into the situation. The Labour Party is about supporting working people, or it should be, not triangulating from opinion makers such as the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the Times. So they've got to sort out their identity, and they've got to come up with a set of policies. There are lower paid people and there are wealthy people in this society. And what's wrong in this society is that there is an imbalance between the people that do the work to keep this country going, who create the wealth of our civilisation and don't get a fair share of that wealth because it's going to people who are vastly wealthy. Labour should be comfortable with backing working class people who are struggling, and one of the ways that they can redress the imbalance is through industrial action where negotiations fail. What else are we to do? Are we to plead? Are we to beg? We want to bargain for our futures. We want to negotiate. And if we're not bargaining, you have to beg. And I don't want any working class people in this country to have to beg the employers for a decent living. And Keir Starmer shouldn't want that either.
It's pretty good.
Way to go, Mr. Lynch.
That's awesome. I don't know anything about him other than these things. Please do not tell me any problematic things that may or may not be out there about him. I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
But it is fantastic to see union leadership actually taking it to the media and calling out these bad faith attacks as bad faith attacks.
Right.
Because this is what they do. And while the UK media is a special type of bizarre, the corporate media here in the States is very much the same. That's how you end up. I mean, even supposedly progressive independent media, people like Ryan Grimm writing, many thousands words article without interviewing a single worker.
Right.
It's a true blind spot. In some cases, it's a blind spot, and in some cases, it's intentionally there to fight back against working class people.
Right. Yeah. I just have to wonder if there are any any leaders in the labor movement that are as rhetorically gifted as Mick Lynch is, because I don't think that they've really had the spotlight on them like Mick Lynch has, and so they haven't really had the opportunity. I mean, even Sarah Nelson, probably one of the best orators in the labor movement right now. I have no idea how she would do, under such constant attack. Fred Redmond, Secretary Treasurer of the AFL, I don't know how he would do. I mean, Cecil Roberts is another really good orator, but I don't know how he would do. They're just these. So I guess it's kind of pick your poison, because in the U.S. the media just ignores you for the most part, and then if they are not ignoring you, they'll allow you the time to kind of say your piece, and they're not going to, generally speaking, go crazy hard on you. But in the UK, it looks like you're in the news all the time, but they're just attacking you the whole time that you're on. So I don't know.
I think that if we have a strike as substantial and as economy rocking as a railway strike, I suspect our media would look a lot like those British tabloids. We know that Fox and Wall Street Journal and those types would be, but I suspect we'd see a lot of the same from, CNN and MSNBC and those types as well.
Right. Yeah, because, even none of the strikes are nearly as disruptive. Yeah, you have to wonder how a strike that is even half as disruptive as the rail strike would go over in the United States. Because you can definitely imagine CNN, MSNBC, and certainly Fox News shifting from either ignoring or being ambivalent to an outright aggressive thing, because that's the argument.
Look at how they treated teachers who were organizing during the pandemic, and how public school workers were demonized, and we saw that from a lot of supposedly liberal op-ed writers, places like The Atlantic, that were really leading the charge against educators who dared to organize for safe working conditions and safe learning conditions. Mm-hmm. So I think if there was any threat to capital, if there's any threat to the bosses and endless profits, I think if they saw that in any substantial way, we would see where their loyalty is.
Right.
Ultimately, they're selling advertisements, and they're trying not to rock the boat. They're trying to provide dividends to their shareholders. And if they can instill some right-wing ideology into the masses, all the better for it in their eyes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because what is density in the UK? Union density? I'm not sure. Do you know offhand,
I'm not.
Adam? It's
I'm
probably like
sure.
60-something%. Right, UK union density. It's a lot higher than it is here. Oh, wow. It's actually not. 23.1%. Huh.
So it's better, but not by a huge margin.
Yeah.
And
just double, whereas a lot of Europe is like in the 60, 70, 80%. But
and I'm not as familiar with British labor history as I am American, but they, much like we had the PATCO strike of air traffic controllers crushed by Reagan back in, 81, Thatcher went after the coal miners.
Right. And that's something that they also brought up, this is one of the big thing has been, don't you care about, you heard it, don't you care about armed services veterans or whatever, and it's been your inconveniencing consumers and implications of violence and stuff. They never come out and say, are you going to be violent? Because they're not going to be. But there's definitely that implication. And there was one interview where somebody was like, do you wish the 80s were here? Are you going to replicate the miners' strike or whatever? And it's just like crazy.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think corporate media does play a really substantial role in people's worldviews. And so, I struggle with that because sometimes a lot of times I try to tune out of it. I try to stay off social media. I intentionally try to avoid, CNN and Fox and those kinds of outlets, because it's brain poison.
Yeah.
It just makes you feel bad while confusing you and misinforming you.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it does really shape people's worldviews. And you can see that with some of the politics that people have. We were mentioning off air, or I was telling you off air, and I'm not going to belabor this point, but, I saw people last night who were outraged over the Roe v. Wade decision who said this was the fault of Bernie and the Bernie bros.
Right.
Yeah. In 2022, you still are saying that, and could you walk me through that? And I'm just curious, how powerful this media consumption can be to shape people's views of the reality that they're living in. Because I can't put myself in that headspace to be able to say, well, sure, I'm going to look around at the state of this country in 2022 and blame Bernie Sanders, of all people. It's bizarre to me. But there are people who are legitimately doing that, who legitimately believe that, and not just trolling.
Yeah.
And that's concerning.
Well, we've got Democrats in the House, in the Senate, and the presidency.
Right. And so I think it's just a really difficult thing to grapple with. How do we respond to corporate media's influence on people? How do we break through corporate media? Can we use it to our advantage at times? And ultimately, how do we deprogram people?
Right.
And that's what I encountered, like in the 2020 Democratic primary. There were folks that I had many conversations with who were, older folks who had been religiously watching MSNBC and CNN for, at this point now, decades. Religiously reading their mainstream newspapers now for decades. And it's hard to deprogram the amount of ideology and propaganda that has been just forced down their throats. And the Bernie campaign was a way to illustrate that, but I think pretty much any foreign policy discussion.
Right.
Anytime, other countries come up, whether it be China or Russia or Venezuela or God forbid, Cuba, you see the extent to which people have opinions that are not based on the real world. They're based on what they've been watching on TV or listening to on the radio. So I think, that's why I think I do this show. I think there's value in providing alternative voices that is centered around the working class and working class people. But it's difficult to underestimate the extent to which corporate media has a role to play in people's lives, in the way people respond to politics.
But even despite that, though, the RMT put out a press release about a recent poll that showed the public, even despite all the attacks from politicians and the media, of the UK public supporting them. From the poll, only 17% of UK citizens support cuts to staff on trains and stations, and only 16% support the cutting of safety critical workers from inspecting and maintaining the rail tracks. Opposition to both of these measures is high at 63% and 70% respectively. 70% of the public believe that rail workers should have a negotiated pay raise that takes into account the cost of living, while just 11% disagree. 59% believe rail workers have the right to strike if negotiations fail, and only 18% are against it. 62% believe that the government should intervene to ensure rail companies meet the rail workers' concerns. Only 14% are against this. 84% of the public believe the profits from the rail industry should be invested in protecting jobs and services, as opposed to 16% who believe they should go towards shareholder dividends. So that's a pretty powerful repudiation of the of the British press,
Right.
and of the British political class.
Absolutely, and I think that kind of tracks with what we see over here in this country, where unions have never been more popular as they are today, at least reflected in public opinion polls. Whenever we looked at specific struggles, like take the teachers, for example, even despite the media narratives and despite the onslaught of media demonization, parents and students and the public at large generally supported the teachers as they organized during the pandemic. So it's worth remembering, especially as we, are digesting so much bad news, that we are the majority.
Right.
We are the majority. Working class people are the vast majority of this country and Great Britain and the rest of this planet. We have a majority of people on our side. And, the people who want to take away our rights, the people who want us to live in poverty, they are a minority. Unfortunately, they are a very loud and powerful minority. And, we've talked a little bit on this show about the militant minority in the context of labor organizing and the labor movement, and how a small but dedicated group that is a statistic minority can wield a lot of influence, both in pushing their union to be more militant, but also in actually winning victories on the shop floor. And we're not the only ones who realize that. The right wing, the far right, certainly realizes that. They know they have a minority, but it's a militant minority. And, a faction of the ruling class, a faction of oligarchs, are right-wing extremists, and they have cultivated a mass base around bigotry that they can wield very effectively.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.